so we all like it when we can get +1 to hit or +1 to wound. But let's have a bit of a think about how modifiers really affect the maths behind our models. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're dedicated to understanding the tabletops of the 41st millennium. Today I thought that we'd have a quick chat about dice roll modifiers and some of the impacts that they can have on our games. A lot of the skill of the game of Warhammer 40k comes with understanding the relative power of your units and abilities in relation to the enemy's units and abilities, and understanding the value of modifiers of dice rolls, which are everywhere in 8th edition, is very important. So let's get into the meat of the video. So as we've said, modifiers are everywhere. Many stratagems will give you a +1 to hit or +1 to wound. Chaplains can do this with their litanies of battle. Some units have positive or negative modifiers for shooting at fly units. Raven Guards get +1 to hit and wound against characters. Eliminators can use the +1 to hit and +1 to wound by their Sergeant's power. We can get +1 to hit with our Devastators when using Signums, and Salamanders get +1 to wound with their Melter and Flamer weapons. The list really could go on and on and on, and I suspect this would be a very long video if we talked about every sort of modifiers. But the main point of this video is this: you will get the most value out of a modifier when you apply it to the dice roll that you have the lowest chance of succeeding. So for example, if you are firing a bunch of autocannon shots, which are strength 7, against an Imperial Knight, which is toughness 8, you'll be wounding on a 5+. Now say for example, you can get a +1 to wound on those autocannon shots, you'll be wounding the Imperial Knight on a 4+. So that's a 50% increase in damage output, which is absolutely enormous. So for example, if you're firing a unit of suppressors against that Imperial Knight, their damage output will go from an average of 2.6 wounds to a mighty 4 wounds. So that's quite a big value as for a modifier there. So if you compare this to a last cannon, that will wound the Imperial Knights on 3s, so if you can get a +1 to wound roll on the last cannon, it will then wound on 2s. Now this looks like it's had the same buff applied to it, but wounding on 2s compared with wounding on 3s is only a 25% damage output increase. So basically it's only half as strong when applied to a weapon wounding on 3s as it is with a weapon wounding on 5s. Now obviously it's a little bit more complicated than that. The weapons that wound on 3s will often be more efficient against their chosen targets than ones that wound on 5s, but this isn't always the case. For example, Imperial Fist heavy bolters that wound on 5s are really quite efficient against vehicles. So if you can get a +1 to wound, say with their Tank Hunter stratagem, those heavy bolters are going to jump to absolutely ludicrous damage output increases, because you'll basically have added another 50% to their damage output, which is already incredibly high. If you want the full list, going from a 6 up to a 5 up will double the damage dealt, so an 100% increase. 5 up to 4 up we've already discussed is a 50%, 4 up to 3 up is a 33%, and 3 up to 2 up is a 25%. Now this works in the other direction as well. So if your opponent has a negative to hit modifier, for example, if they're a crafty Eldar plane with a -2 to hit, then this is going to abnormally punish armies with a lower ballistic skill compared with relatively high ballistic skill armies. Say if you have a high ballistic skill army that's firing a anti-tank weapon that hits on a 2 up, the -2 to hit modifier is only going to negate 40% of the incoming firepower. That's the difference from going from a 2 up to a 4 up. Compared to this, if you're an Imperial Guardsman firing a las cannon at that flyer, you'll be going from a 4 up to hit to a 6 up to hit, and that's cutting the damage by 66%, which is an absolutely enormous decrease in the damage, and makes it very unlikely that you're ever going to be efficient when dealing with that kind of modifier. So to go over a few common examples, the armies that benefit the most from positive to hit roll modifiers will be the lower ballistic skill armies, because say a Space Marine going from hitting on a 3 up to hitting on a 2 up isn't quite as powerful as a Guardsman going to hit from a 4 up to a 3 up, and it also means that Space Marine vehicles with better ballistic skill are better suited to moving and shooting, as they'll only drop from a 3 up to a 4 up, which is -25% damage output, compared with a guard vehicle moving and shooting, which will take a -33% damage hit. Positive modifiers to wound are generally a really powerful increase in damage because weapons are usually pointed around how strong they are, and a lot of their points cost comes from whether they can wound high toughness models on a 4-up or better. Being able to boost yourself up the wound chart like this can make a lot of lower strength weapons really potent. We already mentioned those Imperial Fist heavy bolters, but even things like bolt weapons with +1 to wound, wounding a vehicle on a 4-up rather than a 5-up, or grav cannons, potentially wounding heavy vehicles on a 4-up with a lot of nasty shots, are both very powerful. Finally, it's not as often thought about, but saving throws are also modifiers, and you kind of have to flip your thinking on its head here, because a successful roll is something that rolls less than the save, so you're going to get the highest value out of your AP when shooting at models with the highest save possible, so a 2-up save. This means that say if you're comparing two weapons where one has no AP and one has 1 AP, that 1 AP weapon will be far more valuable when you're firing at a model with a 2-up save than a model with a 6-up save. For example, if we have a unit of 5 Space Marines fire 10 bolter shots at some orcs, and then 5 intercessors fire 10 bolt rifle shots at orcs, the intercessors will kill 3.3 boys, where the regular tactical marines will kill 2.7, which is a 20% increase. The AP is helpful, but let's compare that to when we're firing against some other Space Marines in cover with that 2-up save. Those 5 intercessors with their 10 bolt rifle shots will on average kill 1.1 marines, whereas the poor tactical marines will only kill half that amount, so 0.55. That means that against a 2-up save, -1 AP is literally worth double the amount of damage compared with 0 AP. So naturally, your higher AP weapons will be massively more effective than your low AP weapons against targets with high armor saves. Obviously, this is pretty much common sense, but it really does show the value that -1 AP is absolutely awesome when applied to 2-up save models, but is only a very minor buff when dealing with hordes. On the other hand, if you have a +1 to save from being in cover, this is far more valuable to use on a higher armor save unit. Say if you manage to get a unit of your Space Marines from armor save 3-up to 2-up by being in cover, you'll actually double the survivability against AP 0 weapons. On the other hand, if you're playing with poor Imperial Guardsmen with just a 5-up armor save, you only increase their survivability by 33% from going from that 5-up save to a 4-up save in cover. This is one of the reasons why the prepared position stratagem is particularly good when you're using a massive army of vehicles with 3-up saves. They can't often all get in cover, and going from a 3-up save to a 2-up save is amazing, particularly when you're fighting armies that like to spam a whole load of low AP weapons. So that's the main thing that I want to get across. Positive modifiers and better AP will have the highest value on rolls that you're least likely to succeed, and the opposite is true of negative modifiers. So let's take a look at a few specific scenarios where modifiers come into effect. Firstly, they interact interestingly with full rerolls. Say if you have a Space Marine Chapter Master that can reroll all hits, it has a lot more power on a unit that's taking a negative modifier, so is hitting a fair bit worse. One example might be if you're running a Chapter Master alongside a bunch of Space Marine Stalker tanks, which have good firepower but are -1 to hit against ground targets. So the Chapter Master has really good synergy because those rerolls will come into effect more often because of that negative modifier to hit. You can use some modifiers to avoid a negative effect. Say plasma exploding on a 1 can be avoided by having a positive modifier to hit, such as say combining a Chaplain's Litany of +1 to hit with a big squad of Hellblasters who are going to be overcharging at the enemy. Not only do you get the positive damage output that his litany will bring, but also you avoid a lot of your Hellblasters exploding on themselves. Positive things can also access certain abilities. A lot of abilities trigger on a 6+ rather than an unmodified 6. One of the main examples is sniper weapons, so if you can get a +1 to wound against a target when you're firing a lot of sniper weapons at them, as well as the damage increase that brings, you'll also be accessing a lot of extra mortal wounds as an added bonus. Sticking with that theme, it's very powerful when you can get +1 to hit and to wound, such as for example with Raven Guard in the Tactical Doctrine when you're shooting at characters, or perhaps with Space Marine Eliminators when you're using the Sergeant's Guided Aim ability to give the other two Eliminators a +1 to hit and wound. The effect is so powerful that even when you're hitting and wounding on 3s, this far outweighs the sergeant's additional shot that he would have if he fired anyway. And as we've already discussed many times now, if they're wounding on anything worse than a 3+, it will only increase in value because modifiers have a bigger effect on rolls that you're more likely to fail. This means that, say, if you're taking aim at an Imperial Knight, you'll always be wanting to use the Sergeant's guided aim ability on your other 2 eliminators, because they won't be wounding on a 3-up, and this means that the Sergeant's modifier will have greater effect. I think that understanding dice modifiers can help you understand the value of your units and your opponent's units in the game. One of the most direct advantages of being clearer on this, though, is thinking in advance around units that can most benefit from these buffs that you have available. To take one powerful example into account, if you have a Salamander's Leviathan Dreadnought with dual storm cannons, he'll be firing out a massive amount of strength 7 shots. Those 20 strength 7 damage 2 shots will pretty much make a mess of most targets, including toughness 8 ones. He averages 7.4 wounds against a Lehman Russ, for example, just firing those storm cannons with no buffs. However, because he only wounds toughness 8 targets on a 5+, he is an absolutely brutal choice to use the Salamander's Crucible of Battle stratagem, which is 1 command point, which will give you a +1 to wound. Making that 5+ wounds turn into a 4-up will give you a 50% damage increase, and he'll then be averaging a mighty 11 wounds on the same target, so you've just basically spent 1 command point to increase his damage output by a little under 4 wounds, which is very nice indeed. It also means if you have a defensive option to use a stratagem to get a negative modifier, say if you're piloting a Fiendish Eldar warplane swooping about the battlefield, that lightning fast reflexes stratagem is going to be the most valuable when it's applied against lower ballistic skill armies. Say if you have an entire guard gun line taking aim at you, your scary Alatok flyer will be going from a -2 to a -3 and be completely untargetable for any models hitting on a 4+. Like I said before, a lot of this will be complete common sense, but I think that it is important to understand why it's common sense. Now I think that I've said the word modifier so much that it's lost all meaning, but if you do have any thoughts or input about the effects that dice roll modifiers can have on the game, then feel free to leave them down in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching an Auspex Tactics video. Feel free to subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you guys next time.